Hello. Before beginning, credit where credit is due. I'm a big fan of the Pete Complete RimWorld series. I wish he'd upload more often. Alas, I'm sure he's a busy man. To get my fix, I figured I'd make my own series inspired by his, so please, if you haven't, go watch his Ice Sheet and Extreme Desert series first. I will be adding my own seasoning to the episodes by going full-blown random regardless of the ease or impossibility. If my pawn is incapable of violence, firefighting, construction, has an addiction to every drug in the code, and has 2 wooden peg legs, so be it. I have a few quality of life mods installed, they are listed in the video description. I tried to keep it closer to vanilla in the spirit of making it relatable to the majority of players. With that said, let's begin our story. Our settings will be played on Merciless Randy Random. In honor of current events, the seed will be named Pandemic. We random our world location, and the tile we find ourselves in is a flat tropical rainforest intersected by a large river. This will be a rather hot climate, but we will have access to year-round growth and an abundance of flora and fauna. We have a higher risk of diseases, but that's something we should always prepare for anyway. Our random pawn is 18-year-old Harriet Zhang. As a shelter child, she grew up deep beneath a toxic world. She received a comprehensive education, but had no opportunity to do physical labor. In terms of stats, this reduces her construction and mining by 2, increases her medical and intellectual by 3, and increases her social by 2. We got tremendously lucky with her traits. She's a quick sleeper, which will increase her rest efficiency by 50%. She is sanguine, which provides her with a perpetual plus 12 mood bonus. And she's industrious, which grants her a plus 35% bonus to all work speed. As far as her skills go, she's going to have a difficult time building her own colony alone, but she has a double passion for animals, art, and medicine, with an additional single passion in intellectual. What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a young, productive, healthy, empathetic, intelligent, and beautiful woman.
I've been really trying.
If only she knew how to start a fire or pluck a blueberry. Our luck continues to improve as we start near a large shelter. This ruin stands near a fertile plot of soil and the aforementioned river, which we can use as a reliable source of electricity down the line. As we look around the map, we find some notable points of interest. Just next to the upcoming farm lies another, smaller ruin that we can use for building materials. To the southeast of our base lies a rather dense vein cluster of steel and machinery. 2 hours south, we see an ancient danger. To our southwest, we have another large ruin that can be broken down. And finally, to our west, we have a special vein of uranium. As you've likely noticed, we've also got no shortage of wood and wildlife. There are some geysers nearby, but it will be a long time before we have the research or expansion to accommodate that as a power source, especially since the hydropower will do just fine. As Harriet begins to chop the overgrowth, I realize that her skill is too low to create a ranged weapon. For now, we'll have to focus on foraging for sustenance. Also, on her to-do list is to begin sowing a rice crop on the fertile tiles. This will provide us with a food source within our home area, so we are not totally reliant on foraging in the coming weeks. Unfortunately, with such a poor green thumb, her wood chopping is rather slow, and putting a roof over her head is more pressing. Harriet then moves to disassembling the steel sarcophagi to build up the walls. Upon clearing the area, she gets the layout of her structure set, but begins having uncomfortable levels of hunger. She sets off to forage for a meal before continuing with her work. This ends up becoming another issue for her over time, however, as she ends up botching a lot of harvests due to her low plant skill. In fact, it's not just her plant harvesting that botches frequently. In hindsight, it may have been better to start off with a smaller room to give her a roof over her head, but ultimately her excellent traits keep this lapse in judgment minimally consequential, and she rests at the end of her first day of survival. The following morning, she starts with foraging since her food supply is non-existent. Randy decides to taunt us by offering us the weapons that we can't craft when neither can we afford them. At the very least, it's nice to have an armed escort should any of the wildlife or raiders attack. The day consists of mainly foraging, and by nightfall, Harriet is sowing the rice fields as our guests decide against a sleepover. On the morning of the 3rd of April, Harriet wakes up and builds herself a toy, showing off her legendary building skills once more. After a little crop sowing, she decides to play with herself. After a brief relief, she returns to her garden. During another foraging run, 2 rare thrumbos enter her area. Aside from marveling at their majesty, there's little we can do to benefit from their arrival at the moment, so the young lady continues picking berries in the jungle. She ends the night with some more hit-or-miss construction before going to bed. Now at this point, I also take notice of her heat stroke. I had completely forgotten about the temperatures, but fortunately the following day it ends up being temperate. So after finishing her construction without any heat stroke, she's free to go on another foraging mission. We'll plan on installing a passive cooler once we get our supplies under control. Upon returning to the base, she gets to roofing the structure, and another arduous day of survival passes by uneventfully. On the 5th, Harriet wraps up the roofing and builds herself a bed. No more sleeping on the bare floor for this gal. She spends the rest of the morning leveling her construction skill on repairs. Unfortunately, her next meal doesn't sit too well with her stomach. After a short round of gameplay, she sleeps off the sickness. In the late afternoon of the following day, another drop pod lands. To the northeast, carrying a tempting capture. Christina has some of the skills that Harriet is seriously lacking in, namely cooking and crafting. She's also a passionate doctor, which is always a plus. She is, unfortunately, a misandrist, which could lead to intercolonist conflicts down the line, but Harriet is a female and could really use an extra pair of hands. Our current situation isn't exactly ready for a capture, but we can at least rescue her and hope she joins. After hauling home the berries, Harriet goes to Christina's rescue. Later, as Christina announces that she plans on leaving, we get a raid that attacks immediately. This is problematic since the attacker is armed with a knife and we have no weapons or traps. Speaking of traps, it turns out our gal is in deeper than we gave her credit for, as she does not even have the minimum skill required to build a trap. Harriet does the only thing left for her to do, which is to fight melee with melee. After a brief aneurysm, I go for the club, due to it requiring less work to craft since time is of the essence. While the poor girl rushes to mold metal into a blunt weapon with her bare hands, the raider begins attempting to, stab his way through our metal wall. Harriet equips her club and attempts to let Christina have an extra reason to believe in misandry. Unfortunately, the attacker hears the door and loops around to hunt Harriet down. At this point, I'm aware that Harriet is hungry and has no food, whereas the raider is nearly full. There is no outlasting, no outranging, and no security. There is only one thing left to do. Fight! Fortunately, from the years of slapping drunk, thirsty dudes in the face for trying to make out with her in the subterranean bars of the toxic world that she grew up in, she has a marginally higher melee than he does, so she has an advantage. She gets a couple good licks in, while the scrawny aggressor continues to miss. Ultimately, she ends up with a few minor cuts, but nothing too crazy. Now at this point I recall that Christina isn't planning on remaining with us, and Cobra here also has a set of skills that could complement Harriet's abilities, namely construction, mining, and cooking. Since he's also 18, he's age appropriate, and nothing gives a mood boost like a lover. Sure, he just tried to stab her with a knife, but Harriet wouldn't mind being stabbed by something else. She doesn't hold grudges. Thus, after tending to her wounds, Harriet turns the building into a temporary prison, kicks out Christina, and heals her new boy toy. Once that's been dealt with, she collects her perfectly timed harvest and moves her bed outside. However, it does not seem as though Randy has any interest in seeing this beautiful young lady find romance in this godforsaken jungle, and reminds us the importance of social distancing as he bestows her wounds with an infection. Now, the situation would have already been difficult enough without getting the base finalized and feeding 2 mouths, but On top of everything, we have to deal with gangrene. Suffice it to say, Harriet doesn't need some man-child on her couch while she does all the heavy lifting. So, on second thought, she decides to give him a taste of his own medicine by cutting him as he cut her.
Brutality.
Heaven has no rage, like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury, like a woman scorned. Harriet dumps her prisoner's body out the door and moves back into her hard-fought hearth. With no heal route on the map, we have no choice but to ride out the infection and hope for the best. Fortunately for our story, her immune system is outpacing the infection. By the night of the 8th, she goes to tend to her infection one last time, but passes out in her weakened state. Fortunately, at the arrival of the 9th, she recovers with an immunity against her infection. Harriet awakens to have herself a hard-earned meal from her mature crop and buries her vanquished attacker in a shallow grave. She later repairs her ceiling and moves some furniture. Early on the morning of the 10th, she fells some trees and constructs herself a stool before doing some more repairs to level her construction skill. After a short break of recreation, she begins clearing a field to grow cotton so she can eventually make herself some clothes. While she's outside, a mad chinchilla rushes our colonist. Instead of risking another infection trying to melee an angry critter, Harriet locks herself inside, repairs the base, and cleans the floors to improve the interior. After a short rest, Harriet wakes up early on the 11th and continues repairing the walls of her building. As we can see, the manhunter chinchilla fell asleep and forgot its rage. With this last event, I will end the episode. I hope this lives up to the standards of good storytelling and that you enjoyed your time here. If you'd like to see more, let me know by liking the video and/or subscribing. You can catch me live on Twitch, or check out my Instagram where I post photos and videos of the animals from the rescue I work for. Both links are in the video description. I hope you're all safe, healthy, and fulfilled, and I'll see you next time.